Hi, folks. We're Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of what should be, if any, what should be the qualifiers or qualifications or necessary standards that must be met for anyone to be declared a citizen of any given country, any nation state. Doesn't matter whether it's Britain or Norway or the Congo or Nigeria or I don't know, Thailand or anywhere in the world. What should be the conditions now, or the standards that have to be met? Now, there's various schools of thought here. Some say, well, DNA testing, is one way, and that's certainly being embraced by quite a few countries, including many in Africa, by the way, black countries, that is. Others say, well, you have to prove lineage going back a certain amount of generations, but the DNA is in isolation, not material to that. So if your great grandparents, or at least one of your one relative from each generation is local born, then that could be considered as a bar you would have to meet to be declared a citizen. And others have other sort of requirements of qualification. Some places have particularly rigorous citizenship tests, for example. Others have very high standards in terms of health and education and work experience and things like that. All of these really achieve, in many ways, a similar or maybe not the same, but certainly a similar objective to saying, well, we only want the people that will. Now, in African countries, quite a few African countries actually, they've got you get a DNA test and you have to prove that you're from that tribe and your lineage is, I don't know, I think they've got a cutoff point. It has to be 90% of that, and it varies actually. Some it's 75%, for example. But in fact, you've got to have a clear majority of DNA from that local tribal area that go back many hundreds, if not thousands of years. Others have that, you must be black and you must have some other qualification there. But really, pretty much all the African countries, so you want to be a citizen, you got to be black. That's number one. And then it can be DNA lineage that you must be of that tribe or that region or that subset of the Bantu, the wider Bantu population. Now, when black countries or any country other than white countries have some sort of filtering process for accepting citizenship, as distinct from, say, guest workers or something like that, whenever any country has that, and if they're not white, it passes without comment. There's no big speeches in the United Nations thundering about Nazis and black supremacy or nothing like that. It passes by without a comment. In fact, the international media don't touch it. And yet it's quite widespread. Like out of all the countries in Africa, a majority have some sort of qualification, your DNA, for example, to say, well, if you want to be a citizen, you must meet this qualification. But if any white country had exactly the same as a black country, any white country, then there would be it would be a crescendo of international proportions. The Hitler Nazis, it's 1930s Germany, it's Hitler against swastika, and there'd be absolute pandemonium. But when black countries, or any non-white country does it, that's fine. What's wrong with that? In fact, if you criticize for example, if you criticize a black country for doing it, then you're still the Nazi. So you're a Nazi by saying, well, we'll do we'll do exactly the same as the black country's doing it if you're white. We'll do exactly the same as exactly the same. Not a syllable different from the way the black guys are doing Nazi, fascist, Hitler. And if you then complain about the black people doing it, then again you're a fascist, Nazi, and Hitler. So there's no way of looking at this. No matter which end of the telescope they take hold of, they're always going to find a way of saying that you, the white person, is the Nazi, the Hitler, the fascist, white supremacist, swastika. So this is an interesting one, but even in addition to, or as well as DNA tests, various other countries, including places like, I think it's Jordan, or places around Asia, Thailand, this sort of thing, they have various requirements that you have to meet to become a citizen. Now, if you don't meet those requirements, you can't become a citizen. And so you have to prove that one of your ancestors owned property in that country. And if you can, and I think it goes back maybe 3 or 4 generations, something in that order, maybe 5 generations, but you have to prove that one of your ancestors owned property. And if you can prove one of your ancestors from 100, 200, 300 years ago owns property in that country, then you can claim by extension citizenship. You have to have lived there. Your ancestors had to have lived there. So this is another way they've got, effectively, that's a DNA test of sorts, because only that tribe was in that place, that part of the world then. Sure, there are a few smattering of Turks as supervisors and regional managers, that thing, but not very many. It pretty much all that tribe. So if you own property there, then you had to show property over generations. You couldn't have bought it and 5 minutes later you sold it, like that sort of thing. So intergenerational ownership of property, then you're a citizen. So that's pretty much the same as a DNA test. I mean, the outcome is the same. And there are various things around that you have to prove that a number of your ancestors worked in the area, or were in service of the local government of the area, these sorts of things. And again, they're on or about the same as a DNA test. Now, if you look at all the countries in the world, probably a third, I would say more than a third of the countries in the world, not always the poorest countries, but many are the poorest countries. If you look at all the things in the world there, then there's a lot of countries, about a third of the countries, that have got some sort of a threshold. You have to, be it DNA tests or showing that you own property going back generations, this sort of thing. But when you look at it, it all means about the same thing. But if any white country did this, again, there'd be screams of pandemonium. The United Nations human rights would be screaming about Nazis have taken over. But why don't they say the same thing about all these other places that are doing it? Why is it only bad? It is only bad when white people do it. Anyone else does it, fine, nothing wrong with that. So now, if you're not a citizen in these countries, you can go there if you want. You can go there as a student or as a tourist or whatever. There's nothing. So, or even apply for a guest worker visa or a work visa. But the issue, you can't. If you haven't got citizenship, then you can't own property. You can't have a bank account. There's a whole lot of things you can't do, which effectively make life near impossible. If you get a work visa, it's handled through like a labour hire, international labour hire type company, and then so the finances and the work visa are handled through them, and you're just set up in a little tiny pod to sleep and eat and go to work, and that's it. So all of these countries have quite strict controls over who comes in, who becomes a citizen. Yet anybody can pony up to any white country and go, yeah, look, refugee, asylum seeker. No, hey, I've got no reason. I just want to turn up. I'm being persecuted, and that's it. They can walk in the door, and a year or two later, they're declared a citizen. Now, how many citizens in the West don't speak a word of English? They don't assimilate. They live in ghettos. They're effectively living the same life that they led in the poor country, only that they're parasiting and looting the treasury of the rich white country. So, I mean, what the fuck use are they to society or to the economy? Zero. In fact, they're a negative effect. So, but nonetheless, any peasant from anywhere, any shithole country anywhere in the world is encouraged, if not invited, by the globalists to come to the West. And look, not a problem. You'll get residency real quick. Citizenship will fix it, and you can just come, and then you can bring out your whole family, your 10th cousins, your whole fucking village, and so on and so on. But if the white countries want to stop that, even tone it down a bit, or then they're screamed at for being Nazis. But again, any black or brown country can do much worse, the same thing or much worse, and they'll they're just ethnics. They'll be congratulated for being stunning and brave. White people do Nazis, Hitler, fascist, swastika, the whole thing. So what now, when there was the supposedly white, for example, the supposedly white Australia policy, or more or less the white migration policy, as in West and Northwest European migration policy, with some Mediterranean, but to the United States. With the white Australia policy wasn't necessarily white Australia. There were still other people coming in, Pacific Islands, that sort of thing. But they had quite a high standard of, you in effect needed a certain education. You needed to be of certain health. If your health was poor, nah, you're not getting in. If your education was, you didn't have a trade, or you weren't like a qualified, doctor or accountant or whatever, then it was tough to get in. So a lot of hurdles you had to jump. And if you wanted to become a citizen, you had to pass, I wouldn't call it rigorous necessarily, but you had to pass like a civics test. And so there were a lot of people that couldn't pass it. Their English wasn't good enough or something like that. But you had to have pretty decent English. So there was, effectively an approximation of a point system. If you didn't speak English, then you had to have health and education and job experience on your side. If you didn't have that, then you had to have like a lot of children that would, young children would grow up to become Australians. And so, somewhere you needed the points in order to make it into Australia as a migrant. So the standard, I wouldn't call the standard super high, and they certainly cut a lot of slack to things like, the Greek peasant migrants and Southern Italians following World War II and during the communist civil war in Greece, things like that. So there were some adjustment. The Lebanese civil war, letting Lebanese. So the standards were lowered here and there, depending on the supposed humanitarian situation. But if you look at the manifest of migrant ships coming from Europe to Australia, and you read down the list, not everybody, but nearly everybody's qualified in something. You're looking at bricklayers, concreters, tradespeople, carpenters, architects, nurses, and so on. So everyone seemed to have a qualification, right? Now there were a few labourers there, but where the labourers was there, then they had large families of young families, or they were bringing over. So there's all these sorts of things were issues, and so the overall wasn't a perfect system, by the way, and no system ever is. But if you applied, say, the immigrants coming from the third world today, and say if they had to meet that same standard, very few of them would. 2, 3, 4, 5% max. 5% max would make it. So simply not an issue of DNA lineage and things like that, although you can apply to that. Once you put high standards in place of education, can you speak English, all these sorts of things, saying, look, you've applied now, we're knocking you back because you can't speak English, but we're offering a free English language classes in India, or wherever your area is, wherever you're playing, we're offering free language. So if reapply in 3 years' time, and if your English is good enough, we'll have you in. You can come in. You meet some of the other criteria, but you can't speak English and you've got no job experience, or something like that. But offer them the opportunity. Well, come back, address those issues, address those shortcomings, then come back. And once you get people prepared to that level of commitment, then they're also prepared, on balance, also prepared to integrate and assimilate, which is really the big challenge of our times. The surplus population of the planet is massive. It's in the multiple billions, and they all want to come to the rich West. And the West, like any other country or place or area, has the right to say, well, look, we can only take in a certain amount of people before things go to shit, where we are. So we want people that contribute to the economy and want to start a new life. They want to have a new life in Australia or in America or wherever. And therefore, we want people who are going to assimilate, integrate, and leave the old world behind. Sure, write to your folks or your auntie, and that's but send the email. But you've come to start a new life. That is, and if you're not prepared to do that, don't come. You're not needed here. You'll only be a problem. You'll only want special pleadings, special handouts, special giveaways. You'll be nothing but a pain in the ass. So make that effort. And if people have that, so the skills and the so on, then they're much more likely to integrate. Similarly, if they arrive in small numbers, they'll be sprinkled out all over the country. So that the opportunity, they just won't have the opportunity to create the ghettos. And once you have the ghettos, then you have the special pleading, we want special handouts, we want special political representation, we want special this, that, and the next thing. Once they're sprinkled around, you don't get that. Now, it won't be perfect, and I've known Indians that came to Australia in the 1950s, for example, and there were no other Indians anywhere, so they couldn't form a ghetto. Yet, as soon as they get, they marry, they will only marry other Indians and still send back to the village of their ancestors in India for husbands and brides for their children. So it's not perfect; not everyone will integrate. But today, those people, those Indians I'm thinking of, they live in an area where there's no other Indians, and all their colleagues are white people. And this, so as far as it's possible for people like that to desperately hang on to their cultural sort of legacy, they've integrated probably as far as they can. But that's better than the forming of the ghettos and the constant bleating and demanding of special representation and special handouts. So the idea of should DNA be the determination? Yeah, maybe it should. And I think, should lineage going back generations be an issue? Yes, I think it should be. But more importantly, just as important, once you raise the bar on the standards of education, language, and so on and so forth, not from corrupt countries like India, where all the people who got fucking degrees just bribe their way into them, but real sort of independently assessed exams that make sure that in the 1970s, when I was a young kid, people coming from kids coming from other countries had to sit a special exam to determine which school, which lane of which stream of the top or the bottom, whatever they'd be put in, all that. And often people who came over with professional qualifications had to sit an exam and to prove that they actually did have that knowledge, whether it be in, I don't know, medicine or accounting or fucking architecture or something like that. They had to, or even to prove it in a trade. So there was a lot of controls there. And if you came in and claiming to be a carpenter, but you couldn't saw a piece of wood to save your life, hey buddy, you're going to have to go back. So there was all sorts of quality controls that are in there. So I would argue that quality controls, if they're done rigorously and so on, will be in effect the same as, or not the same, close to, a near enough approximation of things like DNA tests in order to gain citizenship. And I think those are important. And it doesn't matter how it's done, as long as those quality controls in one form or another. And always people who can demonstrate DNA lineage in the country should take precedence, I believe, over those that arrived yesterday. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.